In my first video about the Akai MPD218, I called it a budget beast, and I was super impressed with everything this controller packed in for the price. Well, after getting to put it through its paces for about a year now, I've gotten to really see how well this thing integrates with an iPad music production setup, and spoiler alert, it's pretty dope. What is up, creatives? I'm Jahrell, your music technologist, here to help you master the tech you need to make music freely. First things first, if you're looking for a video on how to map this controller to Beatmaker 3 on your iPad, you're definitely going to want to check out this previous video on the Akai MPD218 right after this one. Also, make sure you watch to the end because I'm also going to show you some other MIDI controller options that may actually be better for you than this one. Alright, we're going to kick it off with price. This bad boy, the MPD218, comes in at $119 most of the time. It can sometimes get to $100, so be on the lookout for those sales. But for the price, I definitely think this controller is still some of the best bang for your buck. As far as build quality goes, it is plastic, but it's a sort of quality plastic. It feels durable, doesn't feel cheaply made. It's got a two-tone, black and red thing going on. The pads do illuminate red on the bottom, and then, we've got some red LEDs in here. The pads themselves are actually really good quality. They're really thick. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, real thick pads. They're MPC quality, seriously. I don't actually own an MPC, but a lot of people that do say these are very comparable. They are also very similar to the pads found on this bad boy, the Akai MPK Mini. You got 8 pads. They are a little thinner on the MPK Mini, as you can see there. And they're also a little bit smaller, but these guys, full-size pads and very thick and very pleasant to use. They may feel a little bit stiff at first because there's not a lot of pressing going on, but they are very responsive to your touch, and the velocity sensitivity is great. So these 6 knobs right here are actually endless encoders. So they continue to spin in either direction. This is helpful for things like when you're in your DAW and you're trying to use the same knob to control different things. You don't want to have to get the knob all the way back to a certain position to be able to automate things. It just makes your life a lot easier. The knobs themselves pick up where your software left off. Like I said, there are 6 of them, but because of this control bank button, it gives you basically 3 pages of 6 knobs, which brings it to 18 knobs really. So you can turn any of these 6 knobs, map them, and then hit B, boom, and you're off to the next one, next set of 6, and so on. The same goes for the pads. These 16 pads are actually 48 pads because you have a pad bank button here which goes between A, B, and C. So same thing here, fresh set of 16 pads, fresh set of 16 pads, and so on. One thing to note about this controller is I've heard reports of people having pad sensitivity issues with the Akai MPD218, where basically they'll either get ghost triggers or they'll have a certain pad won't pick up, or it'll go at the same time as another pad. I haven't had any of those issues with this controller. This is the second one I've bought, and both of them have not had any pad issues with pads not responding and things like that. You get a couple double triggers every once in a while, but I've never had a MIDI controller that absolutely never double triggers. So for the most part, this thing is always getting it done. No problems with the pads. Your mileage may vary, but it seems like Akai has fixed this issue in their supply chain so that the pads that are coming out now seem to be functioning a lot better. Some key features with this thing are that it is class compliant. I am always on the look for class compliant devices because, as you know, we do a lot of iPad music production on this channel, and things that need drivers are generally a no bueno for iPad unless there are some specific software on iPad for them, and in most cases there is not. So class compliant all the way, please. This one definitely checks that box. It is also bus powered, which is the second thing I'm always looking for in any device I hook up to my iPad. Bus powered, basically you just hook up the USB-B port to your iPad through your dongle of choice or hub of choice, and it's already powered and ready to go. No extra cables That's what I like. Specifically, for those of you out there that are also using Beatmaker 3 like me, you can map every one of these knobs to the macros tab in Beatmaker 3 and use them to control your macros. So right here in the macros tab, if I turn this first knob here, you'll see it picks up right on this macro 1 here, which is what I have it mapped to. Couple benefits to this. As an iPad producer, I've come to forget how helpful and how pleasant it is to make music with tactile feedback that is not on a screen. Having an actual knob to turn is great. One of the drawbacks though, when using it with Beatmaker 3 specifically, is that though these knobs can be mapped to the macros tab, they don't comply with the snap on the on-screen knobs. So for example, this top macro right here, you see there's a lock that's turned on, and that allows you to snap your knob to come back to the point you've set it at. So right now, have it set to 56%. If I drag it, it will snap back up to 56. If I drag it forward, it'll snap back to 56. But if I use this knob here, as you can see, it is not going to snap back to 56. Unfortunately, it doesn't follow the same snap. So that is something to keep in mind if you are a Beatmaker 3 user like myself. So you heard me talk about the pad bank button, which lets you switch between 3 different sets of pads, and you might think that's dope. What you don't know yet is that there's also a program select button, and this is super clutch. So if I press and hold this program select button right here, it allows me to pick any one of these 16 pads, and when I press this, it now takes me to a whole new configuration for the entire MIDI controller. So that means all 3 control banks, all 3 pad banks, everything is now fresh and clean, and I could map something completely different over this whole thing. So I now have a whole new set of 48 pads, a whole new set of 18 knobs, and I can do that for all 16 of these pads. So that's 16 different configurations. Now you can use those configurations within one DAW if you so choose. I don't know how you could use that many, but another way to think about this is each of these could be a configuration for your different music production apps. For example, if you want to go between something like Beatmaker 3 and then go to something like Koala, you could map everything for Koala under pad 2 and then use your program select to switch back and forth. So from back to Beatmaker 3, program select 1, boom, different map. And this is really helpful because you want different functions to do different things in different apps. So that's a way to think about it. You could even have one for Cubasis over here, pad 3, boom, you're set. GarageBand, pad 4. I think that's super dope. You also have this full level button right here, which basically turns off velocity sensitivity for your pads to where everything is at the full level. This can be helpful for some things, some instruments you don't want to have velocity on. If you're using an iPad, you can always play on the on-screen pads, which would be basically the same thing. But sometimes you still want that tactile feel, and you don't want the velocity necessarily. You've also got note repeat right here, which does function well. You can set it up using your MIDI controller and pressing this NR config button, and that will show you your different parameters. So this says 1/16th right here. That's the type of note. So it goes from quarter note, eighth note, 16th, 32nd, quarter triplet, eighth triplet, 16th triplet, 32nd triplet. It'd be cool if they had a 64th in here, but they don't, unfortunately. And then you can set your swing. So swing is off right here, then it goes up to 54%, and then all the way up to 62%. And then you can choose whether to go through the external clock or the tap tempo. Right now it's set to tap tempo, and if I press this, hold down note repeat and press a pad, that's one thing that's dope. It is recognizing the note repeat, but it's also getting the velocity from how hard or soft I hold this pad. So I'm just pressing and I'm holding this pad and I'm letting off, pushing harder and letting off. And that is changing the velocity, and that is super dope. Now, quick note about note repeat and Beatmaker 3. If you want to use the external clock feature, it is very important that your controller is set to external clock right here before you open up Beatmaker 3. So if I try to do it now, what you have to do is press play, and that sends the clock information to the controller. Then I hold note repeat and I try to do it. You can see nothing's happening. But if I swipe out of Beatmaker 3 after having external clock turned on, and then I reopen it, go into your settings and check and make sure you've got output devices turned on. You've got the MPD right here. Your MIDI clock out needs to be turned on, and then you want to hit sync on the MPD. And then if you hit play, hold note repeat, press a pad. Aha, there we go. So it does sync to the clock. And just to prove it, I'll go ahead and turn the metronome on so you can hear it. Okay. So external clocked note repeat does work in Beatmaker 3, but you have to make sure you have those settings ticked. Make sure your MIDI controller is set to external clock before you open a Beatmaker 3, and make sure you have those settings turned on and that your project is playing, and then you will get the note repeat. Another huge feature of this MIDI controller for me is its portability. I like to take things on the go when I can. It's one of the great things about being an iPad music producer, and I use the Magic Keyboard with me all the time. So I just set up my iPad on the Magic Keyboard case right there, and then I can run this controller. If you tilt the iPad all the way back on the Magic Keyboard case, you can then slide the MPD right under it just a little bit. I don't know if you can see that properly. Hold on. And it makes for a really dope little portable setup. If you think about it, it's kind of like having your own little MPC on the go, because you got an MPD here hooked up to your iPad, and it's all in one small package, and you can just set this up and boom, boom, boom. In Beatmaker 3, unfortunately, there's no keyboard shortcuts anyway, so I'm not using the Magic Keyboard. Might as well cover it up with this controller that I would be using, and it makes for a super dope, compact setup. And this thing is super thin. So, I mean, it's not the thinnest thing in the world, but it's a lot thinner than a lot of other MIDI controllers, and that's dope. It can fit right under the iPad, and then you got your workflow set right there. On that note, I highly recommend, if you get something like this, get you a right angle cable just like this one, so that you can always run your MIDI controllers right up against any device that you have. With the included cable, it sticks out a bit, it goes straight out, and that can be annoying when trying to set up with your other devices. This cable came in at, I believe, $6.99, so super clutch. So the next thing we need to talk about is the included software that is bundled with this controller, and it says it right here on the side of the box. You've got Ableton Live Lite that's included. If you don't have a full-fledged DAW, getting a light version of Ableton is always solid if you're using a laptop or desktop. MPC Essentials, it's basically a plugin for desktop DAWs to easily interface with your controller, so you can load up your sounds inside your DAW really easy. That's really solid. I highly recommend using that in whatever your DAW of choice is if it comes to being a laptop or desktop producer. And there's also a standalone or DAW-less production version on the desktop, so you can just start cooking up beats without using a DAW. The MPD218, although it doesn't say on the side here, is also compatible with MPC Beats. That's Akai's new beat making software. It's not their full-fledged MPC Studio, but it's MPC Beats, and it really is a pretty solid DAW if you're just making beats. And you can make full songs, and it interfaces well with all Akai hardware. You can get that for free. Anybody can get that for free on Akai's website. The other two things that this does include is the desktop percussion plugins, Big Bang Cinematic Percussion and Big Bang Universal Drums. It's a couple of desktop plugins, and that's going to give you access to some pretty dope percussion sounds. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff doesn't translate well into the iPad world, but it's all good. iPad apps are already cheap for the most part, and you can get some pretty dope instruments on the cheap. Now, my overall thoughts for this controller: I still think it's a budget beast. I still think it's a solid pick for most people. And coming in at $119, you can't really beat the robustness and the quality of this device and the flexibility when using these pad banks and control banks and the program select. That being said, there may be a couple better options out there for you, depending on how much you want to spend and depending on which features are more valuable to you. So, for example, the PreSonus Atom. It is a very similar MIDI controller to this one. It has 16 pads. The cons are that it is a bit more expensive. It starts at $159, so you're tacking on an extra $40 there. And it only has 4 knobs on the top instead of the 6 that come with the Akai. Now, the pros of getting this controller are the transport control buttons. There's a lot on the sides that allow you to program different things like play, pause, start, stop, all that stuff. That's super helpful, and that's something I wish was on this controller. and unfortunately it's not. Though you can map some of those transport controls to the pads, you're gonna have to probably use a pad bank button to switch between them, and that's more hassle. Having dedicated buttons will be dope, and the PreSonus Atom has those. It's also slightly smaller than the Akai MPD. It's a little bit narrower in this way, and it's also a bit thinner. It's not quite as thick as the Akai. It also has RGB backlit pads, and that's pretty dope, which this doesn't have. It has, red backlit, and it's just around the sides. But, if you don't care about that, it doesn't matter. Another big thing is it has been reported that the pads on the PreSonus Atom are a bit more sensitive and trigger better. You get less double triggers on the PreSonus Atom. I don't actually have one with me, but I've watched several reviews and that seems to be the report on them. But another option that I do have in the studio is the Akai MPK Mini Mark III. And this is a super solid controller. Now, as you can see, this is not just a pad controller. It does have 8 pads here. That's going to be the trade-off. You only get 8 pads instead of the 16. Although it does have a pad bank button here that allows you to go between these 8 and another 8. So you get a total of 16. Instead of the 48 you get with a pad bank button on this guy. But the reason you would get this controller over something like the MPD218 is, for one, they're exactly the same price. Both of these controllers are exactly the same price. I'm going to have a review coming out on this in the very near future, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But this is your one-stop shop. It has pads, it has knobs, it has keys, has pitch and modulation in this joystick here. And it's not that much bigger. It is a bit bigger, but it's actually not quite as tall as the MPD. It is significantly thicker than the Akai MPD, and it is a good bit wider, if you can see that difference there. But this also pairs really well for iPad music production. You still have the portability factor, and I found that if I set this up with my iPad, the cable that comes out the back fits right underneath the iPad, so I can still tuck that in the back and have this flush up against the iPad, not necessarily under it. But that's my current setup. Another plus is that this has 8 knobs that are also endless encoders instead of the 6 that are on the MPD. Now, I would say that these knobs on the MPD are a lot smoother and a lot nicer than the ones on the MPK. It's not a huge difference, but I can tell these ones feel nicer. But you also don't get the control bank button on this, so these 8 knobs is all you get. You don't get the 18 that you would get with the MPD. Also, it comes in some dope color options like this gray and black one, which you don't get that kind of customization with something like the MPD. There's just the one colorway. But some of the cons of this controller, like I mentioned, you get less knobs technically because you don't have the control bank button. The pads are also slightly smaller, and the knobs don't feel as nice as the MPD, but those are only trade-offs for exactly the same price, so keep that in mind. Quick question: between the MPD218, the MPK Mini Mark III, and the PreSonus Atom, which controller do you think is the most worth the price? Jump down in the comment section right now, let me know. If you're picking up the Akai MPD218, definitely check out my link in the description. It's an affiliate link. It doesn't cost you anything extra to use it, but it gives a little kickback to the channel, which is always appreciated and helpful. And down in the description, I'll also link the video that I did showing you how to map the 218 with Beatmaker 3 and get to work in there. So check that out. Until next time, creatives, go make something dope, and I'll see you in the next video.